Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan, your friendly General Counsel from ChainArgos, and with me as usual every week our CEO, Chief Data Scientist Jonathan Reiter. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the comments, likes, and subscribes to keep them coming. We do appreciate that. That's what we do this show for. We do it for the clicks. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about in this week's podcast, we're going to talk about USDD and the Bitcoin that was allegedly removed. Well, it was removed, so allegedly is probably wrong.
It was allegedly there's a problem. But
I'm not saying that's a problem. It was actually removed.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Next, we got the Optimism fraud-proof reversal. John's got all the dish on that. If you don't know what that is, he'll give you more information. Finally, Mango Markets SEC settlement and issues there with using the monies in the DAO to cover your legal costs for crimes that you've committed. We'll talk a little bit about that as well at the end. And of course,
it's a civil settlement.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. And a little bit of bonus material as well. So let's just jump straight into the USDD stuff and the Bitcoin that was removed from backing. Of course, Justin Sun said that everything's all good. And so, technically speaking, that should be the end of the show. But, of course...
Well, I mean, I should make it clear, I agree with. So what happened here, USDD is a stable coin.
Indeed.
On the Tron network.
Of course.
That's backed by some reserves held in the Tron DAO, whatever. There's a Tron DAO reserve, vaguely similar to the Luna structure, but only vaguely similar. In the case of USDD, they accepted Tether, Bitcoin, and Tron as backings for this stablecoin, and it's an over-collateralized stablecoin in the same way that MakerDAO is, something like that. So it's similar to both Maker and Tron. We've talked about this quite a while ago. What was unique, really, or somewhat out there about the Terra Luna ecosystem were that the governance token for the project that was focused on the UST stablecoin was the main collateral for the stablecoin. So there was no real connection to external activities, and a lot of the legal issues around it subsequently were about how they claimed there was a Chai ecosystem. There was other stuff that used these products, and all of that turned out to be fake. So you had a thing that was generating a stablecoin, and the governance token of that thing was the main backing for the stablecoin. That's very circular. Maker accepts Bitcoin and Ether as collateral for stablecoins, but because the Bitcoin and Ether are used for stuff beyond just Maker, it's not as ridiculously circular. Whether or not it's circular in some sense, it's not what we're talking about today, right? But, Bitcoin could be used for stuff that's nothing to do with DAI, with the MakerDAO tokens. Now, USDD isn't used for a tremendous amount of stuff off the Tron blockchain, so backing it with TRX, with Tron tokens, is closer to the Luna style, but it was also backed with some Tether and some Bitcoin, whatever, various things. Okay, so that's the setup here. It was originally, if you're going to back it entirely with Tron and you believe all the activity on Tron is completely fake, then it's exactly as circular as UST, Terra Luna. If you believe that some stuff on Tron is real, then it's less related. If Maker was only 1% of activity on Ethereum, then there'd be no real, it may not work, but that's because Ethereum failed independent of DAI, whatever. So the TRX price, the Tron token price, has gone up actually somewhat recently, whatever. And so the Bitcoin backing for this thing was removed from the list of places where there's backing. That wallet held around 12,000 Bitcoin in it at the time it was removed. There have subsequently been a few thousand Bitcoin of outflows from that wallet. And this is, so Justin Sun publicly said, the over-collateralization for this thing has been, 200%, 300% for a long time, meaning the value of the dollar stablecoins outstanding is wildly less than the value, mark-to-market value, of the Tron tokens, stablecoins, and Bitcoin inside the reserve. This reserve is real, is a disclosed specific address, whatever. And so when it's wildly over-collateralized, people can withdraw some of the collateral. That is true. It is fine. Now, what has happened is the remaining, this thing is a couple hundred million, 700 million, whatever, outstanding USDD. What's happened is that almost all of the remaining collateral is TRX's Tron tokens. There's a little bit of Tether, but it's really quite small. It's in the tens of millions of dollars at this point. The Bitcoin's been removed. So this is now moving towards a purely Tron-backed Tether, Tron-backed Tron stablecoin thing, because USDD is a Tron stablecoin. if the Tron network's useful for all kinds of stuff, fine. So, he's not wrong. While there have been issues with how decentralized the governance for this DAO is, famously, there's only ever been one proposal that passed a long time ago, and the proposal was to use the interest earned on burned tokens to back the reserve, which actually, I think this is a separate subject, but I think that proposal was reasonable, and the language was just very mangled because they didn't mean burn in the same sense. Whatever. So we'll see what happens there. It is interesting to note that this collection of entities were involved in some hubbub around wrapped Bitcoin, where people are trying to get their hands on some Bitcoin to establish sufficient wrapping, as there were questions about the BitGo migration. And one would not be astonished if it turned out that somebody looked at this thing and thought, oh, well, there's 12,000 real Bitcoin that we don't really need over there anymore, so maybe we can use those to back our other wrapped Bitcoin. A lot of the flavor of what's happened in the last 5-7 years is somebody tries to count the same dollar 8 times, and their hope is the price of everything will go up far enough that they then have enough money and it's all good, right? So it's possible that what happened here is USDD was a bit of a airbag scam, sham, whatever.
Yeah.
The value of a bunch of stuff went up enough. Now they got enough dollars. We're good. Even if that wasn't the case, the reason this thing is 300% over collateralized is the price of stuff going up. So
Yes.
it could have been under collateralized and is now over collateralized, whatever. So I would not be astonished to find other piles of Bitcoin in the Tron ecosystem that start getting cherry-picked out of, oh, yeah, we don't need that over anymore. We don't need that anymore, to try to get the backing on the other thing far enough up. It's also possible that overall that whole ecosystem's always been solvent and the accounting is just sloppy, or the way it's presented is sloppy, right? Okay, if these guys come up with the right amount of Bitcoin and they were never on Huobi because Huobi had 7 other addresses we didn't know about, like, we're not saying that's the case, but this is not a group that has covered itself in glory with fantastic, clear, and transparent disclosures for years, but they keep coming up with money to pay for stuff, so, it's an interesting next chapter. I suspect that's what's really happening here, that a pile of unnecessary Bitcoin backing was raided to start to build up a war chest to properly finance this new wrapped Bitcoin arrangement. Because somebody probably said, what's backing your wrapped Bitcoin that's going to get merged in with our wrapped Bitcoin, and they needed to go scour the cupboards, whether they were done correctly or not, and find some Bitcoin. So that's a guess, but
I mean, it would be consistent from what we saw and what we spoke about last week with regards to BitGo getting in bit with Tron and stuff like that, and WBTC, which has been around for the longest time and was sort of like the de facto Bitcoin standard, if you like, on the Ethereum blockchain.
But they may have some spreadsheet somewhere that counts the surplus Bitcoin in the Tron DAO reserve as part of the backing for the wrapped Bitcoin over there. And if in reality the same 4 people own the whole thing, there isn't anything wrong with that in a mechanical sense. Clearly the disclosures are awful and don't say that, but
Well, I mean, this is not an industry that lends itself well to disclosures anyway, even on a good day. So,
which is of course ironic, given if the transactions are public, you could try to arrange your stuff in a way that it was verifiable. But
no, but what would be the point of that?
Indeed.
So, moving on.
Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, USDD now backed by Tron. That just means if Tron collapses, USDD collapses. That was always true. Next.
Yeah, I don't know. Hard to say that one. So let's move on to Optimism and its fraud-proof reversal. I think you need to give us a little bit of context on that.
Okay. So Optimism is a layer 2 Ethereum scaling solution based on optimistic rollups. The idea behind optimistic rollups, that's an entire style of scaling solution for blockchains. Optimism is just the name of one based on an optimistic scheme. The idea is that you accept summaries of batches of transactions on the L1 from some subordinate chain that does more volume. It publishes summaries of what happened, and those summaries are considered to be valid as long as nobody can prove that they're invalid. That's how it's optimistic, right? So a summary gets published, and there's a period of time in which someone can challenge the validity. They put down a deposit, and then there's a dispute resolution procedure. This relies on people who have enough money, time, energy, expertise, interest, whatever, to actually do the the demonstration that there's faults here, because it's optimistic, and that means if nobody ever raises their hand and says there's a problem, nobody will ever say there was a problem. The system's not self-verifying, which is one of the ways in which it's not truly trustless, right? There may not be trusted parties, but you're trusting that somebody is going to do this in the same way we've talked about before, that Lightning is trustless for one meaning of the word, but people can steal your money if you're not paying attention, right? So there's another equilibrium solution here. Enough users have to care. So that's how Optimism is set up generically. They introduced a fraud-proof system a long time ago, but only permissioned actors could submit fraud proofs, and the resolution procedure was a little bit too centrally controlled. The problem here is you got a whole bunch of people saying there's a problem, and the system says you're not authorized to dispute things. So, it's sort of optimistic and a little bit myopic. Right? So as part of their attempt to be promoted from the stage 1 roll-up, stage 0 to stage 1 level roll-up, stage 0 is acknowledged as a totally centrally controlled. Stage 1 is centrally controlled, but less so, and more of the process can be. And there's a whole continuum. I think there's 4 or 5 layers that have been defined. Whatever. They work their way up to actually a vaguely trustless, permissionless, whatever system. So they released a system in June that allowed anybody to publish fraud proofs and a procedure for demonstrating that your proof was correct and you lost your stake if you lost the game, and the transactions got reverted, whatever. There's a way of dealing with this. So that system didn't work. It had a number of bugs, and they reverted that solution. So they're back to the old centralized whatever setup as of roughly a week ago, 5 days ago at this point. So that was released in June. So it's bit over 2 months. I don't know what day in June it was, but a bit over 2 months that thing was in use. What actually happened here is that they released the system and then put some parts of the system out for audits. Exactly when they requested the audits versus got them back is a little bit unclear, because there are 3 different audits, and all those audits found a range of problems, some of which were just implementation issues with the upgrade. All right, so these are just straight up error bug things to be changed, and some of them were more generic problems, like there are ways for your fraud dispute procedure to get to the wrong answer, right? So there's 2 things. Well, there's really 3 things to talk about here. One is this thing is now definitely back to the old code, so it's back to being a stage 0 roll-up, and it's interesting to watch the machinations back and forth in a couple places while people wrestle with the idea. Code was released, it was reverted, so the system, in a mechanical sense, is back where it was before. So there should be no dispute about how this operates now, and that it's back under the old style, limited central control. That's kind of step 1. Step 2 is this. They had only parts of the system audited, and the audits came back with serious errors. Okay, this is an interesting way. I mean, normally you run the security audits before you release the code. People release software with bugs in it. Every piece of code I've ever written is riddled with bugs. There's still stuff in production at banks I worked at 20 years ago that probably has bugs in it still. Software has bugs, right? But, should be maybe a bit more testing. Testing is hard, but, it's not great. Now, they have these safety controls to roll things back in case there's problems. But the more you do that, the more you point out that you haven't given up any control over the system, right? So that's going to be a problem. And the third point, which I think is actually the most interesting, is that these security audits, people devised schemes to get around the fraud-proof system, so the ways to game the fraud-proof system. Generically, it's a way for somebody with sufficient funds to force through a faulty result. So either somebody comes in and claims that something was done incorrectly, and something was done incorrectly, they claim it was done incorrectly, and you can still defeat them. So you get the incorrect stuff finalized, right? Or you can go through and you can have sort of the states changed by claiming things were wrong when they weren't and reverting the way that the system operates. They're generically ways to disrupt the system that it's not robust against. So those are, in general, special cases of a broad class of attacks that work against all of these types of systems that were first described in a paper around impossibility of trustless escrow. Put a link in this, and we've tweeted the link to the paper from years ago. Extortion attacks is the sort of technical name here. The idea is you put up a bond to claim that it's that there's there's fraud here, and I can keep drawing you out if I've got more money than you, and tell you have to withdraw your proof, or I'm going to I'm going to basically take all your deposit. Right. Similarly, I can come through, and if I have enough money to keep upping my deposit and attacking, unless you have enough money to come against me, I can buy my way into getting the system into a bad state. So L2Beat, which is a generally very good resource for looking at how L2s work, they think it was after we tweeted this, although I don't know that our tweet's the reason for it. They put Optimism on
Review.
the equivalent of credit watch for a negative downgrade or something.
Yeah.
They're reviewing the project. They had promoted it to stage 1, and presumably they're going to flip it back to stage 0. And then just this morning, last night, they came out with a piece discussing a variety of what are extortion attacks. I responded to them with the general paper, but they've started to figure out that this type of system doesn't work in the limit, and that there are attacks against all of these types of systems. So unless the required deposit to get fraud in, is so large relative to the amount of value staked in the system that nobody would ever game it, it's very gameable. I will also note, and this has been an issue with exploded protocols many times in the past, that if you assume that you're supposed to measure the economic value required to mount an attack against value in the system, you're basically always going to lose. Because if your system has a governance token and that's traded on an exchange somewhere else, that could be a much, much larger market. And so you may think it's an economically negative value attack, but if the guy's short $1 billion worth of perps over on an exchange and the token collapses, you're going to lose $50 million mounting the attack over here if you made 500 over there. And that's a general problem that, beyond even the extortion attack stuff, that you're not going to be able to get around. To some extent, securities laws exist to prevent some of these types of behaviors, because that would qualify as market manipulation, securities, whatever. But if you're not in that regime, we're not talking about that stuff for now. So it's interesting to see how this plays out. Now that L2B, which is a well-respected piece, service, data source, an analyst, whatever, in the space, has published something explaining how a broad class of these things doesn't really work. They could generalize it a bit further. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes down. They need to put these guys back at stage 0 and see what they'll come up with. I will say to the security researcher auditors who found those sort of special case attacks, it's fascinating to see that. I suspect that people will start to notice the common patterns across different attacks. I think 4 different attacks were found, 1 in each of 2 of the audits and then 2 in the third audit. And some of them are almost identical, others are a little bit different. They're all flavors of the same general case. So we're not actually speed running this one. This one's kind of being slow walked, which is interesting, because normally people talk about this space speed running finance, and this is slow walking parts of finance, because people in finance are very good at figuring out, if I do $10 here and $400 there, this makes more than that lost, right? That kind of arb trade is classic. So it's interesting.
Right. Finally, Mango Markets, Mango Labs to be specific. TLDR, there was a vote by the DAO to try and...
Well, so Mango Markets, the exploded...
the exploded... Oh, yeah, you should give them some background. But Mango Markets, the exploded one where the people went to prison and stuff.
Yes,
like that.
Abraham Eisenberg ran a highly profitable trading strategy that took all the money out of Mango Markets by breaking it through Oracle price manipulation attack, whatever. But it blew up, and he's in jail. Although I think he's in jail for... kiddie porn in his laptop.
One of those things, that's right.
But we also for financial crimes.
Yes.
That got nothing to do with. So they blew up, and now it seems like people are talking about settling with the SEC over the protocol. He was an attacker on the protocol.
Yeah.
And then
now they had a vote as to whether or not the DAO, we should use some of the DAO's resources to pay these guys settlements and legal fees, which is interesting.
When the DAO had previously authorized initial payments to get lawyers and set up an entity, if I remember correctly, they paid a couple $100K for this already.
Correct.
And they were asked for a couple million additional.
$2 million, I believe. Something like that.
Yeah. So now they're asked for if the entity that's negotiating on their behalf they already paid for can make a settlement offer with the SEC, and if they pay that money, can they pay the fine on behalf of Mango Labs, which is the thing that developed it, and the Blockworks Foundation, which doesn't appear to be related to Blockworks, the media organization. Yeah. It's some Panama-based foundation. It might be related.
We don't know.
But yeah, the GitHub makes clear that these are the same people. It's the same developers. It's a Blockworks Foundation, whatever that is. So what's funny here is that when these Mango tokens were originally sold, 90% of the proceeds went into the Dow Treasury.
Yep.
5% went into a protocol insurance fund.
Yep.
Spoiler alert, the insurance fund was inadequate. And the remaining 5% went to the contributors of the project.
Correct.
So these people have been paid already.
They have.
And now they're coming back and saying, can we get money out of the contributors,
to pay for the
Dow?
crimes that we committed.
I mean, or at least the crimes that we're settling with the government for. So,
Yes. Okay.
Which is, I mean, and then we'll get the exact voting numbers here. So 387,030,959 votes in favor of using the Dow money and 236 votes against. And the person who voted against actually commented, Dow shouldn't pay for teams' fines for violating crimes. I'm not going to read the address here, which is kind of funny. And, I don't know, what is it? Wadia, right. So even Admiral General Aladdin didn't win elections, 387 million
to 236.
Not 236 million, 236.
236.
This is where the single voter against posts on the forum. I don't know what's really going on here, but this is a bit wild. I suspect that the government, when they receive this order and look at it'd be interesting. It's quite funny. There's still more money in the Dow. The protocols exploded because the insurance fund wasn't big enough. So, interesting. It's yeah. I don't know what to tell you.
I think that one is a strange thing. I think there is a principle and a doctrine in law which basically says that you can't use the profits from the crime that you've committed to cover your own legal fees. That's actually well-established law. Basically, long story short, let's say, for instance, if you've defrauded a whole bunch of investors and yada, 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 you can't actually use the proceeds from that fraud to cover your legal fees or use that to pay settlements. Makes sense.
That normally just means that your funds get frozen until the trial's finished, and then they seize them before you can pay the lawyers.
Yeah, well, but long story short, you can't use the fruits of your illicit activity to pay settlements or fines or make things go away and stuff like that. That's an established thing in law. So I think it's interesting right now that the Dow has voted. Whoever runs Wadia has voted to do that. Of course, it's the other guys that get stiffed on this, but whatever the case may be.
Well, look, if they're able to get that many votes, presumably that the contents of the Dow are already controlled by these folks anyway, because...
Indeed, yeah. Well, there you go, decentralization. Finally...
Well, that 236 votes against, so that guy...
Yeah, that's...
Whoever you are, by the way, respect. Just for the entertainment value, if nothing else.
I mean, Well, Ryan Salami.
Oh, this is sort of developing news, such as it is. So we're not experts in this particularly weird corner of U.S. law. So Ryan Salami, who worked at FTX, has pled guilty to a bunch of crimes related to various problems. And his romantic partner, the mother of his kid, I don't know if girlfriend's the right word,
baby mama,
ran for Congress, and some of the things he got in trouble for related to campaign finance issues for her. He pled guilty and claims the government is reneging on their deal to not prosecute. Or whatever. I have absolutely no idea. So this seems to me like a super technical legal question. So I don't really know.
Yeah.
But there's some fascinating comments in here because he claims that he was misled by the prosecutors that they wouldn't go after his girlfriend if he pled guilty. Right. Now, the quote that's given regarding the prosecutor's comment, I'll have to find this document, it's like snippets of sentences glued together, and you read it and think there's got to be more context here. I have no idea. Right. And then you hear what the girlfriend is, I'm going to say alleged to have done, but we have the charging documents for her now, not just for him.
Yeah.
And what she did is pretty ridiculous. And again, we're assuming that when the government puts things in quotes that are screenshots from people's devices or FTX emails where they have all the emails or statements about New York bank transfers that they just have that information that I'm making it up, right? So who did what? But it seems like some of what he was involved in was employing his girlfriend as a consultant, maybe an employee with a large signing bonus at FTX, having her do no work. The government can establish she did no work because they have all the emails, right? And then you've got examples where money was sent either from his personal account or the exchange account to her bank account, and then almost the same amount of money, like 90%, 95% of the money, was just sent to the campaign to pay expenses. So I wonder if this is all going to turn on them not having needed any of his testimony anyway, right? And the government's going to come back with, here's a totally independent file we use for going after her. Leave us alone. Because he clearly didn't know she was being charged till the documents were released. I mean, that's the way the government works. She was just charged yesterday, today, whatever, our time. And you read that document, Michelle Bond, and that document is wild because this is an incredibly transparent scheme. One it was like, can you just give me invoices for $500,000 and pay me immediately so I can cover these expenses? Oh no, we can't do that. How about we give you a $100K salary and a $400K sign-on bonus? Oh, that sounds fantastic. Who does she report to? Me. And then send her $400K and she pays $388K to campaign expenses. And the government has all of that because they have all the emails and the New York bank transfers. They just get the bank statements for people, right? So this one is going to be interesting just because of the simplicity of the scheme. There were other cases where he was just sending her money that she was sending on directly to pay campaign expenses. Again, this is alleged, but we're assuming when the government says they have New York bank records, that they have these bank records.
When they're making such specific allegations, you've got to assume that they have all the
There was
records.
another case where she worked for some advocacy group that was crypto related, whatever, advocacy group in Washington, D.C. And when she started running for Congress, she had to file some ethics forms, and those ethics forms said that she worked for an exchange, presumably FTX, and she told her employer that that was wrong, and they were campaign contributions, but then she told Congress that it's not, your employer comes to you and says, what is this other job you have that paid you $500,000? And oh, no, that's not a job. Those were campaign contributions. They're filed incorrectly. Like, okay. It's not a great scene. It's a bit of a mess over there. We have mentioned many, many times how it feels like a lot of people who might specialize in securities law, payments law, money transmitter licenses, whatever, are probably not experts in election law. I don't think you need to be an expert in election law to know that sending your girlfriend six figures, which she then sends to her campaign expense bank account, is going to be a problem because you're not allowed to do that. Similarly, having conversations in email with a company that then goes bankrupt and the government has all the emails for, describing the structure of your no-show job where you report to your romantic partner. To be fair, if they were husband and wife, I don't know if they're
I don't think so.
But they're not married. So if you're married, I don't know if there's limits on how much you can give your spouse's campaign. If Melania Trump ever decides to run for something, like I have no idea. Right? Presumably not, but I don't really know.
I don't really know.
But anyway, they're not married.
I'm not an expert in campaign.
That does actually matter here.
Yeah.
It's all.
They were married anyway, so it makes a
all
difference.
Pretty nuts.
Yep.
So it's that one's pretty wild. We're looking forward to that. But so we view that, the Ryan Salame part, I think, is ancillary.
Yeah.
The fact that it's another example of just crypto campaign finance stuff just done in ways that, Nixon was more careful than this.
They didn't even try to hide it, which is kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
And on that disappointing note, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching the show. Thanks for tuning in to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast from. We will see you again next week. Keep up those likes, subscribes, and comments. We appreciate that. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.